Adam, if you'd come up and tell us all about the fair tax and abolishing the IRS.
Great.
As to the general policy of an income tax, I am utterly opposed to it. I believe with Gladstone that it tends to make a nation of liars. I believe it is the most easily concealed of any tax that can be laid, the most difficult of enforcement, and the hardest to collect. That it is, in a word, a tax upon the income of honest men and an exemption to a greater or lesser extent of the income of rascals. And so I am opposed to any income tax in time of peace. I hope that if the Constitution is amended in this way, the time will not come when the American people will ever want to enact an income tax except in time of war. Republican Congressman Sereno Payne of New York, back in 1913, when they were debating the income tax. My name is Adam Yomtov. I'm the volunteer New York State Director for Americans for Fair Taxation. Thank you very much for inviting me here this evening. I also have Doug Wilson, who is a volunteer district director in New York for the 17th district. I live in Westchester County. We both live in Westchester County. Me in the 18th, Doug in the 17th. Let's talk a little bit about the income tax. Anybody know about the income tax?
Yeah.
Federal income tax. Yeah?
Unfortunately.
How about you? Do you know about the income tax? No.
Which thousands of
It affects
pages?
you. It affects you. Actually, a little segue here is that young woman was talking about her camp that deals with cancer patients. And unfortunately, you know, I think about it, and obviously sympathetic, empathetic, thinking about these children, right, and about what they have to go through on a daily basis. But I also think about the tax ramifications. That camp has to generate an income tax return. Imagine the lawyer that they need to hire to set up the nonprofit, or if it's for-profit, to set that up, to have the accountant daily maintain it that's on staff, on retainer, hired to do that. They have to generate an income tax return. There's time and energy dedicated to paperwork that we should not be dedicating, or I believe we should not be dedicating paperwork and time and energy to. I'd rather see that camp's energy, time and energy be dedicated to spending time with the children, to reaching out, to building another facility, adding more acreage, et cetera, et cetera. So taxes creep into every facet of our lives, unfortunately, negatively, whether you're young, from the day of inception of birth, to on the deathbed of my grandfather back in 2010, December 25th. Shortly thereafter, where did I find myself?
Tax office.
I found myself in a lawyer's office, understanding the tax ramifications of his death. It's called the death tax. It's called the estate tax, but it's the AKA the death tax. It is the death tax, trust me. It's not a place where you want to be right after your grandfather passes away. Just some quotes here, I'm taking them out. The income tax is bad because it has robbed you and me of the guarantee of privacy and the respect for our property that were given to us in Article 4 of the Bill of Rights. The income tax is bad because it was conceived in class hatred. It is an instrument of vengeance and plays right into the hands of communists. This is Alan Greenspan, May 21st, 2003, and in the Joint Economic Committee hearing held on that date, he was interviewed by Representative Ryan of Wisconsin, asked two long questions to Mr. Greenspan, responded, "First, Congressman, let me just repeat a cliche, which happens to be true. Mainly that capital doesn't pay any taxes. What happens is you impose taxes on organizations, which then deflect them elsewhere. But at the end of the day, all taxes are paid by people." That's my segue into the fair tax. So what is the fair tax? The fair tax, it's called the fair tax. That's what it's titled in House Resolution 25, and I believe it's House Resolution S13, or S16. It was just recently reintroduced into Congress, in both the House and the Senate. So the fair tax is a sales tax. It's a non-regressive sales tax. It's a non-regressive, revenue-neutral retail sales tax on new goods and services only for personal use. So, if you're a contractor and you purchase a ladder, for your new job site, it won't be taxed. You purchase that same ladder for your home, it will be taxed. It's for personal use. So I want to go back to this statement here that Alan Greenspan stated, which said, but at the end of the day, all taxes are paid by people. It's indisputable. Only taxes are paid by people. So that's what sold me on the idea of a sales tax, and specifically the fair tax, which is if all taxes are paid for by people, why not just tax at the one point, which is at the retail level? Why set up all these machinations here in place prior, before it's the VAT, the income tax, capital gains tax, estate taxes, Social Security, the payroll taxes, Medicare taxes, et cetera, all these avenues that they're currently imposing taxes on us. I speak at the federal level, not going to get into the local or the state at this moment, but there's what are at the federal level, and just do it at the retail level. So, I did some research back in 1996 when I first came across this as an idea. I don't know if it was titled the fair tax at the time, but it's the same concept. It's, I believe, what even Ross Perot was talking about in 1992, about looking at a different way for the federal government to tax us at the federal level. And the interesting thing here is that this isn't some new concept, right? What do we do at the local and state levels? We pay state sales taxes, we pay local sales taxes. We're already accustomed to, we're familiar with. And guess what? When I went in and purchased this book, I paid the tax, I walked out. I didn't have to fill out some form. I didn't necessarily say have to keep the receipt and pay, keep it and then present it as part of my income tax return. No, I paid for it, and in the same token of receiving a good or service, I also paid for my state and local governments to operate. So once again, the fair tax, we have legislation in both the House and the Senate. The only proposal that I know that is in both the House and the Senate, and it is by far above and beyond the most popular proposal. Speaking objectively, there's already 50+ co-sponsors in both the House and the Senate. We have a national network here. It doesn't take 300 million individuals in the United States to make this happen, but we haven't reached that critical mass. And I'm here before you to ask you for your help and your support for the fair tax. Who has heard of the fair tax? Oh, that's good. Because when I probably asked that question back in 1996 or proposed the concept promoting the idea of a sales tax, I was, booed or, pushed out at the street. Used to hand out literature in the subways in New York City, handing out literatures, they crumple them up and throw it at me. But we have a unique opportunity in time where we do have the attention of the general public. We see it in the movements, the tax party, what is it?
Tea Party.
Tea Party, right? And I'm like, where were you guys 1996 when I started this, right? Or not when I started with it. But there is a more general awareness. The ignorance, I would hope to think, has decreased a little. Therefore, making this a more viable possibility. People don't think it's going to happen. Refer back in 1996 when I used to hold up a sign in front of NBC studios and receive death threats. Now it's more like people are calling me. Thank you, Martin, for calling me and asking me to come this evening as opposed to the death threats. It's a little bit more comforting.
Those are coming.
What I wanted to do here, those will come. Okay. Hopefully not this evening, but what I'd like to do is it is that simple. I mean, can't really talk too much about it because there's not much to it. We'll do a comparison. The current legislation in the House and in the Senate, I believe, is 127 pages long. Our income tax code is 67,000 pages long, and that excludes all the case law, all of the forms that you use to fill out, and then all of the paperwork that is also generated. I mean, it's astronomical. Not a paper. What did we talk about, Doug? That instead of 120 million returns, we'd now be looking at about 15 or 20 million returns in a sense that would have to be, say, looked at, or points that would need to have to be looked at, right? So that's what I want to say about the fair tax. It's simple. This is not something where where you hear about it in the evening at 2 a.m. in the morning and it sounds too good to be true. This is it. This is a reality. So I'm here to field any questions about the specific proposal, I guess, of the fair tax itself, and then answer any questions on the income tax also. Ray?
Well, I would guess the first question is, what kind of percentages are we talking about, and what does that do to the revenue to the government?
Okay, so as stated prior, it's revenue neutral. You don't like the rate? I'm sorry, that's the cost of government. We didn't want to get into the fight, nor are we here in terms of talking about where the money is spent. That's a separate side conversation. This is how the money is collected. So to answer your question, which I will, it comes out to be 23%. And depending on how it's calculated, whether you use the concept of, maybe you've heard of it, inclusive or exclusive, it's a different rate. I'm going to be open about that, okay? It's either 23 or 30% depending on how you calculate it, but at the end of it all, the same absolute value of what you would spend is the same. Just depends on how you look at it. When we get into too many details, where there's probably the only point that would need a touch of description. If I had a presentation I could show it, but I need a little piece of paper on it, so 23%.
Let me ask you to ask what trips into people and why they get afraid is because they think the retail item that they're about to buy is now going to be 23% more expensive.
It's already built in.
And would you explain to the folks why that won't be the case, that it will be approximately this? Of course, there'll be cost of living increases naturally, as there always will be, but why it will not cost, essentially, it won't cost any
So
more.
the fair tax, what does it do? It eliminates all personal and corporate income taxes. Okay? It eliminates estate taxes, aka the death tax, capital gains taxes, gift taxes, payroll taxes, no more Medicare, no more, Medicare, and that's in the payroll.
FICA, Social Security.
The programs, if you agree with them, will now be funded via the fair tax. Now, what Doug was alluding to, was talking about, was the prices will, or should drop, yeah? And that's because there's no more income tax compliance for the corporations. As stated prior, it's true, only individuals pay the taxes. So the cost of doing business, one of the costs of doing business is the corporate income tax. It's embedded in the price of every good and service that you and I purchase. It's there. So if it's no longer there, corporation now could either take that money, lower its prices, they could dedicate that time and energy and resources to building new facilities, new manufacturing bases, what's left here in the United States, R&D, hiring new individuals. They want to keep it, and they want to propose it in the form of a dividend, where if they want to give somebody a bonus, they can do whatever they want. They just don't have to spend it on income tax code compliance, which costs roughly about, estimated, anywhere between 150 to $500 billion in compliance costs alone. In terms of hours and what we dedicate in the income tax code, it's about 8 billion hours, more or less. That translates into, of a 40-hour work week, 52 weeks a year, about 3 million individuals, okay? So you take that, don't you think we could do something better with their time, all of our time?
Two questions.
Yeah.
One is, we're a little suspicious of government when they come in with a certain percentage because they have a tendency to raise that rate. So I'd like to know what precautions do we have against raising that 23% because that's been their MO all along. Secondly, I'm curious as to hear about your opinion on the VAT tax. Obviously, this would preclude that, but that's also a concern. That seems to be something they're trying to push. But obviously, what you're proposing is in lieu of that.
Those who expect to reap the blessings of freedom must undergo like men the fatigue of supporting it. So what that means is this: to answer your first question, we must always be vigilant and diligent in terms of ensuring that our government does not take advantage of it. The tax is going to pass, whether it's 23% or 22.7 or 16.9, whatever it is finally that passes in this legislation, that will be the percentage, okay? It's not, exactly 23, exactly, nothing is completely certain, right? So, that being stated, yeah, who's going to line up maybe 2-3 years later, bread manufacturers, milk manufacturers, et cetera, line up and say, hey, listen, our product is so necessary. It's a necessity of life. Give us a tax exemption. Don't tax us. And then what happens is you have that whole line up. So my answer to you is, it's unfortunate, but we're always going to have to be there to ensure that they're not going to change the rate. And guess what? If they do change the rate, and you don't like it, if it goes up, and we don't like it, you know what you do? Call up your congressman. You say, I don't like what you just did. You didn't listen to me. I'm not going to purchase that new home out in Montauk that costs $20 million, and you're not going to have a revenue of $4 million in terms of, if that's a new construction. I'm sorry, it's only a new construction. So you are re-empowered by the fair tax because you decide when to be taxed. Yes.
Are there any ideas on the table for phasing this in that would be palatable to the general public? Like, instead of essentially approaching the public and saying, hey, we're going to end all other taxation now and replace it with this, we could say, all right, we're going to do this at X%, see what happens, and then, you know what I mean?
I don't know exactly what the new legislation calls for, but yeah, we're not going to put the brakes on completely, unfortunately. I would like it. I think it's a very easy change. It's like, what would you, rather do? I don't have anything against, rollerblades with no wheels on them, but would you rather go to work with rollerblades with no wheels or in a Ferrari? So if it's going to take some time, we'll take some time. I believe it's like a 3-year phase-in. Subsequently also, there's legislation, not within the fair tax itself, but separate legislation. I believe it's HJ Res 16, which calls for repealing the 16th Amendment, which actually allowed for a direct income tax to occur. So that will happen. Also, subsequently within the fair tax legislation, if the income tax is not, or if the amendment is not repealed, the fair tax will be repealed also. So there's a safeguard in there. But once again, we all know what happens in the midnight hour of legislation. So we need to be on top of them and ensure that what we want passed is actually passed. Yes?
I mean, first of all, just to even hear you say that this is even a legitimate possibility gives me great hope, because what's the number? Closing in on 50% of our country, in theory, doesn't pay any federal income tax at all right now. So at least everybody will have some skin in the game, and that theoretically lowers all of our burden, and spreads it amongst everybody. But I also see that as the biggest obstacle to you getting anything like this passed, because those 47 or 48% of the people are not paying federal tax today. You don't think they're going to be up in arms? Look what goes on with the unions in Wisconsin.
Well, what happens is they are paying. They're paying the corporate income tax.
But they won't see it that way.
That's where I need individuals and a diverse group of individuals to make the case, to talk to everybody, to make them realize that the income tax is embedded in that cup of coffee that they're drinking.
They won't believe it because now they got to pay it.
Well, I don't need everybody to believe it. That same person who might be against it might be somebody who's not going to be as vigorous as myself and as Doug in terms of wanting to pass through the fair tax. So, we don't need everybody, but I do need a minority. We haven't reached that critical minority as of yet, but it will occur. Given the opportunity to speak about it, for you guys to go home informed. You're now informed. Just educate yourself on the fair tax, and of course, ask me any questions, and then talk about it at events, family events.
I truly believe, if I can answer you, I think, thinking of the glass half full for a moment, that it's a matter of education. And if we were able to get as much education as possible out into the public so they understood the concept, the vast majority of people in the country would demand that we do this. And the scope of the idea of everybody pitches in. When you're buying something, you're actually doing a patriotic act. And when you think of the tax base and the extraordinary size of the increase of the tax base from what it is now, as you said, 1% pays 38% of the taxes and so forth and so forth. We all know the statistics. When you get to that point where you think the criminal's going to pay, the pimp's gonna pay.
The illegal alien's gonna
The
pay.
alien is gonna pay.
Our tourists.
And 50 million tourists are going to pay.
Yeah, yet
And
Wisconsin Senate has big signs saying tax the rich still. These people
Well,
so
that's
don't
it.
get it.
Well, the other thing, if we could teach the people, one more thing, and I'll
Yeah,
try to
of
be
course.
quiet. One more thing is if we could get people to understand that built into this is human nature, that the rich will pay more. Because if those who have been benefited from the system, and those who have done well, that Donald Trump's going to buy a Maserati for $350,000, he's going to send $60,000 to the federal government. The person who's bringing up the family who's going to buy a Geo or whatever is going to pay 23% of $18,000. And the person, and the beautiful thing is really struggling, you're going to buy a previously owned vehicle, there's no tax on it at all, because it's already been taxed the first time it was purchased.
But
There's so much that can capture the imagination of the public, and if we can get them there, they'll demand it.
But it's the
The biggest thing,
antithesis
though,
of the
have they
progressive
done-
idea,
Have
class
they done any
warfare.
projections as to how this scenario would compare with the current system, what they're taking in?
Yeah.
Big sell to it.
It's-
If they can say they're gonna get more under this scenario, then that's a great thing.
It's revenue neutral. It's going to be,
Have
what
they
what
studied
we're,
that?
what we're doing is, you know, the research, the criteria of the research, you know, is, they went out originally, not getting too lengthy, went out and said, what is going to be the best, you know, solution for our current income nightmare? So they came back with the fair tax, yeah? So, but once again, came back as revenue neutral. So I'm not here to say it's going to collect more money or less money. We're just going out there and saying it's going to be revenue neutral because we don't want anybody to come back and say, well, you're trying to cut spending or this. It's too much of a fight to, you know, abolish our federal income tax system and also to say we're going to cut government services. It's all about the collection. Now, personally, I believe there's going to be an economic boom unlike anything that we've ever seen where industrial revolution is going to be made to look like, you know,
You
a
believe they'll
lemonade
take in a lot
stand
more.
for a third grader. What?
You believe they'll take in a lot more.
Listen, when you're going to create an environment that makes people feel good about working, that makes, you're going to make people feel good about working at the end of the week. You sit in that long parking lot called the Long Island Expressway, right? At the end of the week, at least, what you've earned, you've kept. You don't want to pay taxes, you don't have to. You don't buy anything, right? You're no longer having to fill out federal income tax forms. You're removing jealousy that is created by our current income tax system. Don't know if you have a better accountant than this gentleman here. Same situation, but hey, your accountant was a little bit more savvy, sat in maybe on the extra course down in DC, got you that extra tax break. Jealousy, fear, anger, frustration, all out the window. Well, with respect to the federal income tax. But that is a massive part of our lives, and therefore I believe that you're going to be creating some intangible, you know, happiness. And so therefore, when you're creating an environment which makes people feel good about living, then you're therefore going to have a prosperous society. I should have read a quote, it would have summed it up a lot.
There's something else, one other thing, if I can just throw this in, that what this would do, we're farming out all our businesses to India and Philippines and so forth. We would become the most tax-friendly country in the world in which to do business. And people, first of all, they'd be coming back here. The billions, and some people say trillions, that are hidden in offshore accounts don't need to hide anymore. They're not hiding from anything because there's no tax on that stuff.
To be repatriated.
And the joblessness factor then would increase because businesses would want to come here to work.
And it's border adjustable, so when our products produced here go out into the world to compete, there will be no more corporate income tax embedded in that cost of product or good or service that we are presenting to the world, so it's border adjustable.
You've also
Question here?
just cut government service, government jobs without government
How is it
service.
not regressive?
Because you've got rid of all those IRS agents.
How is it not repressive?
You have to cut a single program, whatever
spend money
it is,
instead of save.
cut all those IRS agents.
And listen, who said it back, you know, taxes are the price of what, government, society, we need a certain amount, you need to be taxed. I believe sales taxes are the least imposing in
Let's
terms
say I
of,
make $1 million a year.
yeah,
Right now, I'm paying $400,000 in income tax.
yeah.
Like hell
In
you
the
don't.
scenario, the income tax goes down to zero. Maybe I spend a couple of $100,000 a year in consumables, so it costs me $50,000. It's a windfall for me.
Yeah, so it's your money. I don't know if you're arguing if you're being devil's advocate or not, but it's your money, folks. You decide how much you're going to be taxed. If a rich guy wants to be a miser, not spend anything, that's his money. He keeps it. You're talking about, you know, another concept of redistribution of wealth. It's not regressive up to, in a point, there is a component of the fair tax where it makes it progressive, in that there's going to be a rebate afforded on a monthly basis. Hypothetically, let's just say that the rate is 20% of fair tax. Department of Human and Health Services says that 20,000 is the poverty level, so you take 20% of 20,000. Anybody have the answer?
Yeah. For,
Okay, 4,000.
okay.
Needed an accountant, a lawyer to figure it all out. No, 4,000 divided by 12 on a monthly basis. Every individual is going to receive, that meets that criteria, being single, 20,000 level. If it's a family of 4, the Department of Health and Human Services decrees it's 33,000. Just do the same simple equation, and then that is the amount by which you will be rebated on a monthly basis, therefore effectively untaxing the basic necessities of life. However, what you're doing is you're not discriminating, you're just putting it out there. Everybody pays the tax, but on a monthly basis, the government's giving you money to untax up to your poverty level. So that's how it becomes progressive. The rich person is going to pay more. Why? Because they purchase more expensive things, and they purchase a lot more than you and I. That new home being built down in Long Island, out of Montauk, was a $40 million. I don't know, it was like 40,000 square feet. It was going to be $60 million. New construction. Do the fair tax on $60 million.
What happens to the IRS under your plan?
Bye-bye.
Obviously, it wouldn't need to be this size.
Yeah, the Internal Revenue Service, as we know it, would disappear as we know it. I mean, you're talking about... It's not the individual's fault, it's the, you know, I like to talk about how it's the law's fault. They're just out there trying to do their job and earn a living. But the $12 billion budget, I believe that's allocated 100,000 plus employees now. I've heard the number of 10,000 more IRS employees due to the Obamacare. That would all decrease by about 90 to 95%. There would still be an organization that would have to
Oversee the sales tax
oversee it.
collection.
However, it would be incorporated, I believe, into the Treasury. The state would be, the states would now become the federal tax collector. The states would be compensated. Not only would the business be compensated for passing along the tax to the state government, which I believe is 25 basis points, and the state also would be reimbursed for their administrative burden of collecting that tax, which we're already doing in 45 out of the 50 states, and forwarding it to the federal government.
It's a great point, because now there's no longer any direct connection between the individual free citizen and the federal government in terms of tax. Because what you're doing is you're paying the tax at the retail level. That money, the retail business sends that to the states, and the states reimburse the federal government.
Once again, you're limiting the number of individuals, entities, places in which the government now has to enforce it. Therefore, they'll be able to better, enforce it. Another thing I believe you're talking from is the current perspective of our current environment. I mean, when you come in and you create an environment, as we currently have right now, that causes us to maneuver, to have to avoid, because we have tax avoidance. You're creating this environment, nobody wants to pay taxes. I believe we're creating an environment that is, you know, it's not punishing hard work, it's not punishing savings, it's not punishing investment. And you're creating this environment once again where people are going to feel good once again about life. They're going to be less prone to cheat. And those who are going to cheat are going to cheat, and you're going to put them in jail. You know, those people that are going to be hurt the most are, they're going to be, they're the lawyers that are, you know, jive in the tax code right now, right? Guys at the at H&R Block, et cetera, I'm not here to keep in place a system that doesn't work, just to have, you know, now you're talking about let's keep bad systems in place so we can keep people unemployed. How about if we create a beautiful environment in which people, where corporations, individuals can prosper, and then that tidal wave of economic boom will engross them. So, you know, with respect to the fair tax is not a VAT, young woman asked over here, it's not a VAT. Value-added tax is completely different. It's a tax that's staged at each stage of production on the value that's added at each stage of production. And guess who pays it at the end? The retail consumer. So why are you going to put all of that in place when the retailer, when the consumer, when we all put on our hats as consumers, ultimately pay the tax?
One last thing. Everybody I've spoken to, or most everybody I've spoken to, has always said, it's a great idea, but it'll never happen. And I say you're probably right, because the United States will never beat the Soviet Union in hockey.